us.
Hello,
Maybe we
Rabbi
should-
Solomon. I saw that you left. Hello, Moadim L'Simcha. Dad,
How
can
are
you
you?
hear me? Because I put on Baruch Hashem. I haven't listened to your more recent messages, and
Oh,
I
it's,
have not
it,
started because Baruch Hashem, we had 2 new granddaughters within the past.
Mazal Tov.
Thank you. And my parents are here, and I haven't fully listened to your message, but I did understand that I won't make it for Shavuot. But this is at least same time a little bit of compensation for me. So this I have an opportunity, Michelle Eisenberg, to learn together with everyone here. So thank you, and I will listen to the other messages and leave you one very soon. So looking forward. Okay.
Rav Gad, do you think is it worth waiting another minute or two, or do you want me to begin?
I think you can begin.
Okay, all right. Good evening, everyone. Moadim L'Simcha. A big yishur koach and thank you, first of all, to Rav Gad for being instrumental in putting this together, and also allowing me to introduce the speaker. There's some amazing speakers over today and tomorrow, but definitely the one that I'm most excited about, if I can say that, and that's Rabbanit Shani Taragin. Just for those who don't know, and I think that really in Australia, she's been here a couple of times, maybe she needs no introduction, but just for those who don't know, Rabbanit Shani is lectures not just all over Israel, but all over the world in matters of Jewish education, Jewish law, Tanakh. Here, just to make it more relevant for Australia as well, I believe she's the curriculum coordinator for the Matan Bat Mitzvah program, which we run here in Sydney. And of course, she's been to Australia a couple of times, both to Sydney and to Melbourne. She was here last year for Yom Yerushalayim. We really wanted her, and she was going to come this year for Shavuot. And I've told her as well that although she can't come, it doesn't look like borders will be open for Shavuot. We definitely, as soon as they are open, need to have her back here in Sydney and in Australia in general, because everyone really benefits and is really excited whenever they're able to hear her. So thank you so much, Rabbanit Shani, for giving of your time. And I'm now going to hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Solomon, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity to really, both as a prelude to Be'ezrat Hashem, future opportunities to continue to learn with everyone here. And I see Liddy Marcus from Melbourne, who also logged on, and this is really wonderful to see so many familiar faces and have an opportunity over Chag to continue learning Torah. Very often, we prepare, as Chazal teach us, Shloshim Yom Lifnei HaChag. We prepare 30 days before a holiday for the holiday, and certainly with regard to Pesach, with all the different Zoom shiurim that I'm sure you've all participated in, and many reach a certain climax by the time we get to Pesach. But the truth is that this entire holiday, as the Rambam tells us, is an opportunity over the course of 7 days, lefarseim et hanes, to continue to publicize the miracle, to speak about what the holiday is really all about. So I want to thank Rabbi Solomon. I want to thank Rav Gad for this wonderful opportunity and a day full of fantastic shiurim and a wonderful and special zchut to be part of it. So without further ado, we're going to get started with the theme, which is now that we're very much immersed in our consumption of matzah, and now that we know that there really is a difference between Chag HaPesach and Chag HaMatzot, so much so that I have a little bit of a personal agenda and speaking particularly about matzah during this time, because even as we're wishing one another over the continuum of the holiday a happy Pesach, truth be told, based on Tanakh, based on the story in Exodus chapter 12, there are 2 very distinctive aspects of this holiday. One we already celebrated, and that, as we know, is Chag HaPesach, the Pesach itself, the Paschal Lamb, which is a demonstration of the faith of Am Yisrael, the means through which we were saved, if you remember, from Makat Bechorot, which is going to allow us to leave Mitzrayim. That's the Pesach that we recite, Ba'avur Zeh Asa Hashem li b'titi miMitzrayim, on the night of the Seder. For those 6 hours, really, from the time that we begin eating the Paschal Lamb until Chatzot, that's the time that we retell the story of the Exodus from leaving Mitzrayim from the time really of the sacrifice, which was in fact on the day of Yudalit, on the 14th of Nisan. And we speak about everything that served as a prelude to the actual Exodus, which wasn't until daytime on the 15th. All intensive purposes then, we find that the holiday of Pesach really ended already. We should not be wishing one another a happy Pesach. Rather, from the same eve of the night of the 14th to the 15th, from the time of Tzeta Kochavim until not only Chatzot, but onward, we were celebrating another holiday, and that is Chag HaMatzot. And if you remember, in Shemot Perek Yudbet, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, beginning on the first day of Nisan, that there are going to be two separate but ultimately parallel holidays by virtue of the fact that the same leitmotifs are going to be employed, whether it's the word of bayit, of the home that we're so focused on now, or whether it's going to be the word of mishmeret, watch over something, or whether it's going to be, as we know, the word of achila. There are going to be two separate mitzvot, the mitzvah of the Pesach and the mitzvah of Chag HaMatzot. And Moshe Rabbeinu understands that while Am Yisrael are still in Mitzrayim, the only really relevant one is going to be Karban Pesach. They're going to have to take their lamb, they'll have to watch it for 4 days, slaughter it, consume it, and then they're going to leave Mitzrayim. Ultimately, only in chapter 13, after Am Yisrael has already left Mitzrayim, then Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, for the future, when you come into your land, which they're expecting certainly to be in within the next few weeks and months, when you come into the land of Israel, that's when, in addition to continuing and perpetuating the mitzvah of Karban Pesach, you're also going to be celebrating a 7-day matzah eating festival to remember not only how you ate matzah in Mitzrayim, but also to remind you of how you planned on preparing dough for chametz, but you didn't even have enough time to prepare it properly in Egypt because the Egyptians chased you out of the country, and now you ate it in the end as matzah, heated and baked in the sun, leaving Mitzrayim. That's how you're going to remember your Exodus for the future as well. So what we're going to pay attention to now during these days of Chag HaMatzot, and this is what I meant by my personal pet peeve, trying to wish one another not just a Chag HaPesach, that was, and the first days of Chag, now it's time to wish everyone a Chag HaMatzot Sameach. And as we do, what we're going to explore together now is in fact the progression of this matzah eating, not just the festival, but how the eating of matzot is going to continue through the years of Am Yisrael in the desert. Or to be even a little more specific, we're going to track how everything that we do over this holiday, from the consumption of the Paschal lamb, demonstrating our faith, through the eating of the matzot, not only as we left Mitzrayim, but for the future, how through the food, and I hope I don't just whet your appetite in eating, but also in learning how through the food, we're going to see a progression of Am Yisrael's development throughout not just these days, but throughout the progression now, as we began to count already, Sfirat HaOmer, the progression from Pesach to Shavuot. So let's take a look at this together. I'm going to share you all with the screen of Nikorot as we get started and look and explore the progression itself from the structure of the stories of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Notice we have a very interesting chiastic structure. We left Egypt, and what is the first story that we're actually going to read about, as you know, in just 2 days? And the next story that we hear about is going to be the story of Kriyat Yamsuf. Vayhi b'shalach Paro et ha'am, even though Paro technically sent the people of Israel out of the country, there still is the threat of the Egyptian army. And in fact, as soon as they wait their 3 days, waiting for the people of Israel to have their 3-day seminar in the desert, they notice that these people aren't intending on returning to Egypt as slaves. So Paro, as we know, girds his own chariot and is going to pursue Am Yisrael. The first section of the Parsha, B'Shalach, recounts the final stage of the nation's escape from their Egyptian oppressors. We have the splitting of the sea, the drowning of the Egyptians. And on one hand, we have the end really of the Makot. God even says the same terminology, the Shvatim Gedolim, the plagues, the harshness, the judgment that God is going to execute against Mitzrayim is going to continue, as we know, by Yam Suf. And therefore, once again, for all intents and purposes, we find that even though Israel left to Egypt, the Egyptian trauma hasn't yet fully been obliterated from the hearts and minds of Am Yisrael. They're still having nightmares in the middle of the night. You know, what's going to happen if the Egyptians see that we're not returning to the land? They're going to come and pursue us. And this is in fact what we know from the beginning of the Parsha as well. God did not take them the shorter route to the land of Israel, which would have been through Eretz Plishtim, an ally of the Sixos of Egypt during that time, because had the Plishtim engaged Bnei Israel in war, they would have turned right around and gone straight back to Egypt. Rather, God consciously brought them to the southern areas, taking them southeast of Egypt in order for the Egyptian army to pursue them, so that then they'd be caught between Yam Suf on one hand and the Egyptian army on the other hand. There would be no option for them to return to Mitzrayim. And therefore, the first and perhaps even most essential story is the external enemy. This, as we know, is when Am Yisrael are still eating their matzot. But then they continue immediately after the story of Yam Suf. We hear about the people complaining of thirst. They don't have waters because the waters of Marah could not be ingested. That's where we're going to take a look. The first Nisayon, a challenge of Am Yisrael when they come out of Mitzrayim. God puts them to a test, and there they'll be provided with water. Then God takes them to the area of Ilema, followed by Midbar Sin. Notice that that's where Am Yisrael complain for bread and meat. This is where their matzah consumption has come to an end. They no longer have a supply of the unleavened bread. And we'll see the story that happens over here and why it's so essential, because afterwards they come to a place called Refidim, and once again there's no water. They complain over water, and immediately after that we hear about the external enemy, the first of the wars, an unprovoked attack launched by Amalek. So notice, as we're looking at this entire page, I hope you all note the chiastic structure from the Greek word chias, meaning an X. We see that there's an external enemy at the beginning, an external enemy at the end, complaint over water, and a climactic story that is going to be focused on, once again, our diet, namely complaining over the lack of matzah. We have nothing to eat right now, but people are complaining over bread and meat. And these are going to be the stories that bring us to our next holiday and also to our next resting place, which is going to be Har Sinai. And therefore, it is incumbent upon us, and what we're going to focus on this shiur, on the progression really, of not just Matza to Manna, but understanding why so many of these stories are food-based, beginning already with Pesach, beginning with the Karban Pesach and the Matzah. Now we see there's water involved, but the primary story is going to be one of we want food. Let's take a look and see what these stories then in fact are all about, and what our mindset should be focused on over the ensuing days of Chag HaMatzot as we prepare already now for Shavuot. Let's take a look at how Chazal understand this progression, the whole progression from Mitzrayim through the stories that lead us to Ma'amad Har Sinai. Amma Rabbi Yitzchak explains, Ru'uyin hayu Yisrael b'sha'ah sheyatzu miMitzrayim shetinatein lahem Torah miyad. Notice the terminology. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Ru'uyin hayu Yisrael. In other words, Yisrael were deserving that when they would leave Mitzrayim, they would immediately receive the Torah. Now notice the terminology of shetinatein lahem. They were deserving of having the Torah being given to them. Ela amar hakadosh baruch hu adayin lo ba zivan shel banai. But it's not yet time for the glory of my children. What does that mean? Mishiabutit v'levenim yatsu. These are people who just came out of slavery from dealing with bricks and mortar. Ve'en yecholin lekabel Torah miyad. A beautiful terminology. They may be deserving of passively receiving the Torah, but they're not yet ready lekabel Torah. They're not yet ready to accept this on their own. Mashal lemahadavar domeh, and we can certainly relate to this mashal, perhaps all the more so during these days of understanding what a national and international pandemic is all about. Mashal lemahadavar domeh, Lemelech she'amad beno michalyo. We're just beginning to see this now in China, that even though the people are recuperating from their sickness, what happens? The son of the king has recuperated from his sickness, va'amrulo, and the advisors are saying, Yelecha bencha le'iskule shalo. Let him go back to work. Let him go back to his studies, because now clearly he's better. Let's stop the quarantine and get straight back to our regular environment. Amar, but the king says, Adayan lo bazivan shel bani. It's not yet time for my son to truly shine. In other words, Vata Omer Yelech Mincha Liskule Shalo, when you're saying he should get back to his boarding school, Ela Yitadein B'ni Shnayim Shlosha Yerachim V'machal Uv'mishte V'yavri. Let my son have 2 or 3 months of eating, of drinking, and only then will he get stronger. V'achar kach Yelech Liskule Shalo, and then he will go off to his studies. Hachamar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem says the same thing. My children aren't yet ready. We already see now that it's not healthy to send people back to their regular schedules when their resistance is just beginning to become stronger. Hashem says, Adayin lo bazivan shel banai. If my people now accept the Torah, they'll never have that true strength. They just came out with a slave mentality. Now I'm going to give them the words of the Torah when they're still just recuperating from hundreds of years of oppression. Ella, Hashem says, they need some time to recuperate. Let them be in quarantine for a little while. And not only that, Ella yitadnu banai, shnayim v'shlosha chadashim, b'man u'be'er v'slav. Look how appropriate this mashal is. Let my children have 2 or 3 months of literally food and beverage. I will spoil them a little. I will provide them with the food of the man and the slav, as we know, the quail in the desert and the be'er. I am going to provide them with water. And then they'll be much stronger. Then their resistance will be able to not just passively accept the Torah, but actively be willing likabel Torah. Ematai, when will that be? 2 or 3 months, in other words, v'chodesh hashlishi, exactly as we know, 7 weeks later. So now we're going to take a look at these familiar stories from Pesach to Shavuot, or basically the stories immediately after Yetziat Mitzrayim, focus, as we see, on a change of diet of Bnei Israel, recognizing that this change of diet is not just a physical provision of the man and the be'er and the slav. It's not just to physically strengthen the people of Israel, but rather to prepare them religiously, spiritually. And now all of a sudden we're looking at these food and beverages in a slightly different manner, recognizing that God is really trying to prepare us in every way, understanding that the physical and the religious, both personae of Am Yisrael and at the same time their consciousness, cannot be separated. Let's begin with the first of the stories. Right after Yam Suf, Bnei Yisrael walked 3 days in the Midbar. 3 days in Tanakh, we know, a time of deliberation, a time of preparation. What are they preparing themselves for? Well, let's see. They just came out of Yam Suf, which can also be understood as a whole story of rebirth, going through the waters, and now with the nation of Egypt clearly behind them, lo matzumayim. Now there isn't any water. Vayavo marata, and they come to Mara. And why is it called Mara? Because the waters are bitter. Al-Ken Karashma Mara. Vayilonu ha'am. And clearly there's also a reference, by the way, to Miriam in the story. Again, Miriam, just like Yam Suf as well, telling us that the waters are going to save us. But the people just see bitter waters and they complain to Moshe, what are we going to drink? And Moshe screams out to God. And God doesn't yell at the people, shame on you for complaining. On the contrary, God is going to explain to Moshe that just like Yam Suf was premeditated and orchestrated by God, so too every step along this way. This is part of Am Yisrael's rehabilitation. This is part of their preparation for Ma'amad Har Sinai. This is part of how they're going to come out of their quarantine, out of their homes, out of Egypt, out of oppression. And this is how they're going to be a healthy people, not just unto God, but a healthy people who will understand laws and justice, a people who are going to appreciate the words and the lifestyle of Torah. And this is where it begins. Vayorehu Hashem eitz. Notice a strange terminology. God literally instructs Moshe That's the word vayorehu, like moreh, to teach. God shows or instructs Moshe with regard to either a tree or wood. Vayashlech el hamayim, vayimtzeku hamayim. And God tells Moshe to throw this into the water. This is our first incident of homeopathic medicine, taking something bitter, throwing it into bitter waters, but that's not enough. Sham samlo chok umishpat b'sham nisahu. This is where God initially gave chok and mishpat, law and statutes, v'sham nisahu, and this word of, again, challenging Am Yisrael. This was premeditated and intentional. God says, this is where you're going to begin to learn how to strengthen yourselves as a people. If you begin to follow the statutes of God now, and observe all of his statutes, this, I would say, should be the slogan for today's time. Any machala that we have, God says, not to worry. And Ani Hashem Rofecha. True, we don't always have a vaccine immediately available. True, we don't always understand the reason behind a machala, but God says, I'm telling you that there is a religious message here. When we had prophets, when we had Moshe Rabbeinu, we could figure it out. Today, we have to undergo that introspection ourselves. And whatever the case may be, God says, if you take care of yourselves spiritually, if you gird yourselves religiously with the laws, with the commandments of God, then you have nothing to worry about. I will heal you. All of these physical ailments are going to be taken care of through the antidote of your spiritual performance of mitzvot. And here's the proof. Not only is the water sweetened, but right afterwards, they come to a place called Elim, and that's where there are 12 springs of water, representative of the 12 tribes. 70 tmarim, Chazal explain, not just representative of the Sanhedrin, but representative also of the original 70 members of Yaakov Avinu who went down to Mitzrayim. And now notice how they flourished like tmarim. Wait a second, this is also very strange. They find palm trees in this oasis in the desert. Yes, indeed. Also, though, a little bit of a hint to what lay in store for them in the land of Israel. Here, Hashem is giving them the secret formula. You don't have water? It's true. In the land of Israel, there also won't be an abundance of water. But you follow the mitzvot, you'll have your water, you'll have your tmarim, you'll have your eretz zavat chalav udvash. Not to worry, Am Yisrael, we're supposed to learn through these beverages, through the food, what it means to follow the commandments of God. That's why Rashi explains beautifully. What does it mean that God is our doctor? Melamed Torah. God has given us the vaccines that we needed. God has given us literally the medicines, the Torah and mitzvot, leman tinatzel mihem. It's not just a cure. It basically, these are the vitamins that we need to keep us healthy. Hashem has told us how to even prevent ourselves from getting sick. The Ramban further underscores this concept by telling us every time we say the bracha, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, we recognize that Hashem has not only sanctified us through edifying our religious personalities, but our physical ones as well. Well, let's continue with the narrative and see how immediately after Elim, they come to Midbar Sin. They're in a different area of the wilderness, and what has happened? This is the first time since Yetziat Mitzrayim wherein we find a date. Notice this, the date is Chamisha Asar Yom L'Chodesh Hasheni. It's the 15th of the second month, and all the bells in our mind should be ringing. We know this date. We haven't heard of any calendarical reference from the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim since the 15th of the first month. We're very excited. We finally now have some type of chronological reference. This is exactly a month after Am Yisrael have left Mitzrayim. And this is interesting. This is the first time that they don't just address Moshe, but they also address Aharon. The last time we saw Aharon, just to remind you, was when Moshe and Aharon were teaching us the laws of Karban Pesach. That was a month earlier. Where has Aharon been since? And what did the people say? Let's look carefully at their complaints so that we can understand not only where they are a month after Yetziat Mitzrayim, but how they're looking back at this time period, how they're looking back at the time period of Chag HaMatzot. Vayomru alehem b'nei Yisrael, mi teimutenu b'yad Hashem be'eretz Mitzrayim. you know what? We should have just died. We should have just been killed off by God in Mitzrayim. Because in Mitzrayim, at least, what did we have? B'shiftenu al sir habasar. In Mitzrayim, we were sitting on pots of meat, they say. Ba'ochlenu lechem lasova. As we were eating food to our heart's content, ki hotzetem otanu el hamidbar hazeh, lamit et kol hakahal hazeh bera'av. In Mitzrayim, we had plenty of meat and we had plenty of bread. And now we're out in the midbar, and God just wants to kill all of us in starvation. Notice that this is where we know, Chazal explain, this is where their matzah surplus has already diminished. They have nothing to eat. And Hashem, once again, doesn't complain, does not rebuke Bnei Israel, and instead tells Moshe, this has also been premeditated. This has also been orchestrated. Why? God says, I know exactly what the people are thinking. They're thinking that in Mitzrayim, I saved them through food. And let's go back to their complaint. They're complaining for literally pot roast. They're complaining for sir habasar. Let's please remind ourselves that these people were slaves in Egypt where they did not necessarily, as we know from the Yosef stories and from Paro, after, if you remember, Makat Arov, Moshe Rabbeinu explains they can't sacrifice in Egypt because that's considered an abomination to the Egyptians. In other words, we clearly see this idea of the Egyptians not having any meat. So certainly the slaves would not be eating any meat either. Rather, this is all about the people remembering, please pardon the expression, but literally their Last Supper. They're remembering not the pot roast that they had while they were slaves in Egypt. They remember their last night. You know that feeling when you're really hungry and starving? You don't remember necessarily, or you don't think about what you ate for breakfast. On the contrary, you think about the last delicious Shabbos meal that you had. You think of the last lavish feast that your mother, your wife, prepared for you. You think of the sir habasar. Am Yisrael are saying, oh, we remember that delicious Karban Pesach, that lamb on the skewer, the sir habasar, when God told us also to eat in our finest, with our sticks, with our signs of leadership in hand, with our staffs. Hashem told us to come to a formal dinner, and we had plenty of lechem lasova. And that food, not only was that delicious food, but that was food that saved us. God provided us with food that ultimately saved us in Mitzrayim. But I guess God's power was limited only to the borders of Egypt. After all, here in this God-forsaken wilderness, we don't have any food. I guess God's power was only in Egypt, so we should have just been in Egypt, or God should have just killed us off in Egypt. Why did he save us through food in Egypt if he's going to kill us off here in the Midbar? And God says, that's exactly why I brought you to this situation in the desert, to teach you that my powers are not limited to those in Mitzrayim. My powers extend certainly to this entire expanse of the wilderness, and I'll prove it to you. That's why now I'm going to provide you with miraculous food again. Let's see how many parallels there are then from with this man that Hashem will provide and the Karban Pesach that God provided for in Egypt. We see this, Hineni mamtir lachem lechem min hashamayim. I know you're not used to this, especially because in Egypt, the lechem, all of the wheat, the storehouses that we're familiar with, the sourdough bread that was created by the technologically advanced society in Egypt, that God says that was limited to the Yaor. In Egypt, all of your lechem came from the ground. The lechem literally came from the Yaor, both the waters, all the food. We're going to see that there were only vegetables in Egypt because the water sources are provided by the Nile River and the various tributaries. So Hashem says, now I'm going to provide you with miraculous bread. The bread is going to come down from the sky, meatballs from heaven. V'yatza ha'am v'laktu dvar yom b'yomo. And once again, God says, I'm doing all this to challenge you. I'm doing this, as Rabbi Yitzchak taught us, I'm doing this in order to help prepare you, in order to show you that your physical survival is not just going to be in Mitzrayim, depending on your consumption. It's also going to be based on chukim and mishpatim. Are you going to be willing to follow the edicts of God? And if so, then wonderful. Chizkuni explains, Ani morid lahem ma'achal muchan. I am going to provide for you even better food than you had in Egypt. You don't even have to roast it. It's going to be all prepared. And all you have to do is then spend your free time lasok b'Torah tamid. Just log on Chol HaMoed Pesach to again this fantastic Yom Iyun for all different Pesach Shiurim, because that's what I'm providing time for you. And God says, make sure that you learn Torah with the vacation time that you have, because that's why I'm going to give you this miraculous food. Well, let's prove it right now. What is God basically saying? He's saying, I remember that Sir HaBasar, I remember Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim as well. I don't want you to just celebrate Pesach and then eat your matzah for 7 days and forget about the experience. No, I want you to remember that that experience accompanies you every single day. That Pesach may have only been a 6-hour holiday, and Chag HaMatzot being a 7-day matzah eating festival, but these messages are supposed to serve as the basis of your entire mode of consciousness every time you eat throughout the year. Let's prove it right now. Remember back in Shmo Perek Yud-Bet, as we mentioned, God appeared to Moshe and Aaron and told the people, firstly, now you're going to create a new time consciousness. Let's please remember that in Egypt, which was clearly a solar-based society, and I don't just mean agriculturally based with the various seasons that were there, but solar-based, as we know, and based on the entire Egyptian mathematical system of a 360-degree sundial with 60 minutes, 60 seconds, 12 hours, and of every portion of the day. Basically, the entire Egyptian calendarical system was based on the sun. In other words, it was all based on years, and they kept very exact annual calendars, but they didn't have any months, and for that matter, they also didn't have any weeks. In other words, their calendar consisted of days and years. So Sunday was exactly the same as Monday and Tuesday, but let's see what happens over here. God told them in Mitzrayim, now the first stage of you identifying yourselves religiously is going to be, you're going to have a different calendar. And your calendar is going to be based on the lunar calculations. It's not going to be based on the sun, but you're going to have a chodesh. And obviously it's called a chodesh because the moon waxes and wanes, and there's constant renewal. Dabru al kol adat Yisrael. And this is going to be a law that pertains to every single member of Am Yisrael. Here's the following laws, or here are the following laws that accompany the consumption of the Korban Pesach, through which Am Yisrael will be saved from the final plague, through which they will leave and be redeemed from Egypt. Let's look. Im yamat habayit miyot miseh. Every single family has to pre-calculate how many lamb they should take to ensure that the entire lamb is going to be consumed. So you have to know how many male teenagers you have in your home and see whether or not you can all consume a lamb. If not, then join in with your cousins next door. Everyone has to make sure that they have enough for themselves to eat and to its entirety. And you're going to then take take it on the 10th, which by the way was so phenomenal this year, how the 10th of Nisan fell out on Shabbat HaGadol. Exactly, the dates this year are exactly the way they were during Pesach Mitzrayim. So I know you've all heard numerous parallels as to how this year's Pesach is so similar to the way that we celebrated it in Mitzrayim, in the confinement of our homes with our families, but it's also the dates that match up exactly. And you're going to watch it to the 14th, slaughter it on the 14th, and begin to eat it bein ha'arbayim. You're going to eat this in the time period bein ha'arbayim, basically evening time. And in addition, you'll also take the blood and you'll place it on the doorpost. But the main halacha, lo totiru mimenu ad boker, to show the whole idea of, in fact, getting ready to leave Mitzrayim, you're not allowed to leave anything over to the next morning. This is going to be miraculous food. food through which you're going to be saved from Egypt. And one other halacha, Vatem lo tetzu ish mipetach beito ad boker. Here, the directive in Israel was 36 hours. And there in Mitzrayim, for those hours, mipetach beito ad boker, 12 hours from the evening time until the next morning, they could not leave their homes. And this is how not only the concept of a month was created from Israel, a new calendarical phenomenon, but also the miraculous idea of food being accompanied by specific laws of God. Let's continue though with Shmot Perek Tet Zayin. The story then exactly a month later. Again, the first time all of Bnei Israel are going to be involved. Exactly a month from the time that they left Mitzrayim, the first reappearance of Moshe and Aaron together from the time of Karban Pesach. And what did the people say? Why can't we, in short, go back and have another Karban Pesach? Why can't God provide us with food through which we're going to be saved? And God says, but I am. Take a look carefully. I'm going to provide you every day now with miraculous food. It's going to be food from the heavens, and I'll prove it to you. Not only are you going to see the glory of God, but here are going to be the mandates of your menu. Firstly, you will have the opportunity of eating meat every evening. You can go out and collect, as we know, and not just slava, but some of the basar that's there. And God will provide, the slav, God will provide for the quail, and on a somewhat regular basis. And we will have meat, but all the more so, here's the miraculous food. Miraculous food that, just like the water, is going to be accompanied by laws, but not just any laws, exactly the same laws as the laws that accompany the Sir HaBasar, the laws that accompany the Karban Pesach in Mitzrayim. Number one, every person has to go out, literally explain Chazal, with an Omer LaGilgolet, with a pre-prepared measuring cup for their Omer amount, knowing for each member of the household. They're not allowed to take more than that measurement. Notice this, just like they had to pre-calculate the amount that each person in their household ate for Karban Pesach, they have to pre-calculate how much each member of their household is going to eat of the man. And secondly, ish al yoter mimenu ad boker. You're not allowed to, just like the Karban Pesach, not allowed to leave any of the food over to the next morning. And lastly, one day a week, al yete ish mimkamo b'yom hashvi'i. Just like there was a certain amount of time, certain hours that you weren't allowed to leave your home in Mitzrayim, one day a week, you're not going to be allowed to leave, literally, leave your home in the midbar to go out and collect the man. And that's why you have to collect the double portion on Friday. But notice another subtle idea that's being created here. Just like the miraculous Karban Pesach food created for us the calendarical unit of a month, the man is what's going to create for us the calendarical unit of a week. As we discussed in Mitzrayim, there were only days and years. Now they have days and months and years. And every day was one like the other. This is where I like to quote Rabbi Liebtag, who says that the first day then that the man fell was clearly Monday. No, it wasn't really. It was Sunday. It was Yom Rishon. They start to count days from the time that the man falls. God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, tell them to count 6 days. And once they count 6 days, they'll know then on the 6th day, they should go and collect a double portion. And on Sheshet Yamim Tilkituhu Uva Yom Hashvi'i, Shabbat Lo Yebo. Notice this beautiful terminology. Man creates for us the concept of a week. Or let's just qualify that. Man creates for us the concept of Shabbat. There were certain people who just didn't understand this nature of time, and they went out on Shabbat, and Hashem says, "Ad anna me'antem lishmar mitzvotai v'toratai." How long are you not going to follow my mandates? Don't you see that there's a mitzvah? The commandments themselves accompany the giving of the man. V'yishbetu ha'am bayom hashvi'i. This is where they begin to learn the concept of Shabbat. This is where, for the first time now, we not only have days that were created from the time of Briat Olam, but we have the concept of a week. This is where we already understand the concept of Shabbat as a day of rest for God. a day wherein God is not going to provide for this miraculous food from heaven, a day that reminds us that there are laws that accompany our consumption of food, that reminds us of Karban Pesach. God will continue to save us, even beyond the borders of Egypt, if we only follow the mitzvot that accompany the giving of that food. If we understand once again that our religious performance of mitzvot goes hand in hand with our physical provisions, and therefore we're not surprised then when Am Yisrael come to Refidim and there isn't water, and they start complaining to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu answers, "Matrivuni madi, matinasunat Hashem." Wait a second, we've been here before. We've been at a water story. By now you know how to provide for water. It's not in the hands of God, it's in your hands. Follow the mitzvot. And therefore the Midrash explains, wait a second, why wasn't there water? Oh, that's why the place is called Refidim. Sherafu yedehem min haTorah. Their hands were weakened from the Torah. According to Rashi, Rashi quotes the Midrash that tells us as well that there were certain people who weren't following the mitzvot of the man. You don't follow the mitzvot, then your physical provisions aren't going to be provided for. That's why there isn't any water. So the people complain to Moshe, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, but you know what to do. All you have to do is follow the mitzvot. But the people are so stubborn, and they refuse, and they would rather remain in a state of thirst than to start taking responsibility for their own food and for their own both physical and spiritual welfare. So Moshe turns to God and says, God, they're going to stone me. And God says, okay, you know what you should do, Moshe? Go all the way to Har Chorev. Go to the place of Chorev. Take your staff with you. Go all the way to Chorev. We know that's going to be the area of Har Sinai, where the people are going to learn all the mitzvot. Show them that the source of their water is going to be at the same place, where they're going to have the source of revelation, the source of mitzvot, the source of their instruction that will edify them, that will qualify who they are as a religious people. Go all the way there. And sure enough, Moshe goes and the water starts to flow all the way to Refidim. But in the meantime, while all the strong people are following the flow of the stream to get to Har Sinai, it's the weak, it's the infirm to our left in Refidim. And then Amalek comes to attack. That's when we find the external enemy again. They come to attack. And this is a way of teaching Am Yisrael, when you do not maintain your proper religious persona, when you do not observe the mitzvot, then you won't be provided for. Then you're physically going to be endangered. And therefore, let's fast forward just a little while as well. Let's fast forward and exactly a year from now, when the people are going to be on their way finally, after Cheta Egel, after building, constructing, and even inaugurating the Mishkan. The people are ready to start to travel, as we know, on the 20th of Iyar. And what happens? They start to complain. And in addition to complaining about the entire road and their travels, there are also those who have a ta'ava. And what are they complaining about this time a year later? Mi yachilenu basar. We're tired. We're tired of taking responsibility for our own food. Basar. Notice they're not complaining about their diet. They're complaining about the manner in which their diet is provided for them. Basar. Why do we have to be the ones to observe all these laws, to go out every day and collect the man of that day? And this is very difficult. And basically stand on a line for the man. Again, I don't know by you in Australia, but here every day we have a WhatsApp chat. How long is the line right now to the major supermarket, Rami Levy? Is it around the corner? And is it a 20-minute wait or an hour and 20-minute wait? We're tired of having to go every day to be provided by our food. We remember the readily available food. We didn't have to do anything to get the fish or take a look at the diet of Egypt. They had kishuim, avatichim, chatzir, bisalim, shumim. What are all these foods? The squash and the watermelons and the eggplants and the onions and the garlics. What do they all have in common? Yes, they're vegetables. They're vegetables that grow on the ground. These are perennial. These always grow. And you don't really have to invest in any of them. And the waters of the Nile serve as their natural means of irrigation. And that's what the people are complaining about. Why do we have to keep mitzvot? Why do we have to get up every day and get there early before the man melts? Why do we have to do this? Nafshenu yevesha. We have to be dependent on this food from heaven. And then the Torah says, but the man is beautiful and it actually looks like crystal. How could they be tired of this? Reprimanding the people. once again, it's not about their diet. It's about how their diet is provided for. And that's where God says, okay, let's see, I will give you a month's worth of this love. You will have a month's worth of this quail at your disposal. Those who take a month's worth, meaning for a month long, they do not want to be dependent on God. Rather, they want to collect on their own. They don't want to have to wait for the man. They don't want to fulfill the mitzvot through which they will receive the man from heaven. Those are going to be the people who are going to die. Why is it that the people who only take a few days worth of this love, or the people who take, again, yomayin, 2 days or 5 days or even 10 days or 20 days, those people can eat this love. They can eat the quail and not die. Only those who take a month's worth. A month, we already know. That's the amount of time that we ate the matzah for. That's the amount of time that we're supposed to learn. That's the amount of time that it takes for the matzah festival to truly be infused within us, to truly, really internalize the concept of food from heaven, a food that reminds us of our miraculous redemption. If people are going to undermine that by taking their own food without mitzvot, without seeing God in the picture, those are the people who didn't really deserve to leave Mitzrayim. And we're going to prove it now as we're upon our imminent entrance to the land of Israel. We see then that we went from the chametz of Mitzrayim to the matzah. The matzah that we celebrate right now, our matzah eating festival, is not necessarily to remind ourselves of the Egyptian culture that we left. It's also to prepare us for the redemption from Egypt. The 7-day matzah eating festival reminds us of how we actually left Egypt. And then once we remembered that we left Egypt with the divine hand of God, then God says, okay, now you're ready for the leaven from heaven. You're ready for man. And for 40 years in the desert, they're going to consume this miraculous food accompanied by the mitzvot of God. And now God says, you're ready to come into an agriculturally based society. Soon we're going to leave this holiday of Pesach, which is very sad. Actually, we left the holiday of Pesach. Soon we're going to leave the holiday of Chag HaMatzot. And soon you're going to enter into the land of Israel. Soon you're going to celebrate Chag HaShavuot, which is all about the Bikurim, the agriculture of the land. And Moshe, therefore, reminds Am Yisrael of how for 40 years they ate the man as a means of God challenging them to see whether or not they're going to recognize that their physical provisions go hand in hand with the Torah. Hatishmor mitzvotav imlo. That's why God starved you and then provided you with man so that you would know that it's not just the lechem levado yachya adam, that you don't live literally with the bread. The real secret of your survival is listening to God. And that's why he reminds them of all their miracles in the Midbar to prepare them for their existence in the land of Israel. And he says it's going to look, when you come to the land of Israel, it's going to look at first as if your existence is a very natural existence. God is bringing you to a beautiful land, Eretz Tova, Eretz Nachalei Mayim. I'm sure that you all heard that. We are just slightly below a full Kinneret. For the first time in nearly 70 years, it looks like by the end of this month that the Dagania Dam is going to be opened up in the Kinneret, because we really have these beautiful resources. But at the same time, God says, yes, take a look at the land. It's an Eretz Chita Sa'ura Gefen Teina V'Rimon, Eretz Zeit Shemen Udbash. Even more than vegetables, this land is blessed with fruit. Why is that? This land is going to be one which is going to be dependent, says God, not on the waters from the Nachalim and the Tahomot, the depths, the aquifers, but is also going to be dependent on your observance of the Torah. So it may look as if you're entering into just an agrarian-based society. It looks like you're going to be entering into a beautiful land like Mitzrayim, but it's not like Mitzrayim. It's a land of fruit and not necessarily vegetables. And it's a land where your existence is no less miraculous than it was in the wilderness with the man. It's an existence that is also going to be based on, as we see, and listening to God. Make sure you don't forget to observe the mitzvot, the mishpatim, the chukim, asher anochi mitzavcha hayom, the exact same words that we found by Marah, the same words that we found by Midbar Sin and the Man. Remember God who took you in the Midbar and provided for you, prevented you from being thirsty. Remember the waters that God provided from the tzur hachalamish, from the stones, from the grounds. So you're going to enter the land of Israel, and there's going to be a slight change. Instead of your water coming from stones in the ground, the water is going to come from heaven. And instead of your leaven from heaven, you're going to have leaven coming from the ground. But the leaven from the ground, the lechem min haaretz, is no less miraculous than the lechem min hashamayim. And the means to which you're going to be provided with the lechem min haaretz is going to be the same as how you were provided with the manna from heaven, as how you were provided with the matzah from Mitzrayim. And that's going to be by following the edicts of God. Remember those challenges that you had in the desert, and remember to continue to observe them when you come to the land of Israel. Don't let this experience of Chag HaMatzot just last 7 days. Make sure that these 7 days that we have of eating matzah, of being reminded of this transition, being reminded of our food of redemption, but redemption that is not just a physical redemption, but one that goes hand in hand with being religiously edified, with being accompanied by mitzvot. And let's just revisit then what we just read about as the Haftarah on the first day of Chag HaPesach, on the first day really of the matzah eating festival. Isn't that interesting? We read about they're not leaving Mitzrayim. We read about Shmot Perek Yud Bet. We read about how Am Yisrael ate their matzah already in Mitzrayim, Al Matzot Murorim Yochluhu, to remind them that even though they're about to be redeemed, they had to remember their lechem oni, and they had to separate from the sourdough leavened bread of Egypt. They had to leave the technological and cultural association with Egypt behind them. But notice how beautifully then the calendar worked out. Even though initially, based on being 11 days away from Eretz Yisrael, we should have entered the land of Israel exactly a year after leaving Mitzrayim on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, exactly a year after we approached Har Sinai. But because a few mishaps along the way, especially Am Yisrael forgetting who their source of food is, we find that it's going to be delayed 40 years. But then eventually, once we enter the land of Israel, well, we crossed the Yarden on the 10th of Nisan, and then we read about on the first day of Pesach, albeit probably in the privacy of our homes, we read about how after Am Yisrael entered the land of Israel, after they miraculously crossed the Jordan River, and all the nations hearing about this are completely intimidated by these people of Israel, Hashem tells Yehoshua, now it's time to circumcise the people because they haven't been circumcised for the past 40 years since they left Mitzrayim, because it was very dangerous to circumcise one in the desert. And now for 40 years after being in the desert, now they have entered the lands, the Eretz Avat Chalav Udvash. And now it's time to sacrifice the Karban Pesach. So on Yud Aleph Nisan, the day after crossing the Jordan River, we find that all these uncircumcised males are now going to be circumcised, that at the same time as entering the land and fulfilling Brit Bein Habtarim, just like at the time of the initial sacrifice of the Pesach, we're also told that no uncircumcised individual may partake of the Paschal Lamb. So too, when they first come to the land of Israel, it's exactly 40 years since they left Egypt, and 40 years since the circumcision. Hashem says, now finally, the embarrassment of Mitzrayim is going to be vanished. Now finally, I am going to erase Cherpat Mitzrayim. And we hear that on the 14th of Nisan, Am Yisrael once again bring a Paschal Lamb, something that they haven't done in 39 years. And the reason this is so significant is because this is the first time that they don't just celebrate Chag HaPesach. Take a look. This is the first time that they celebrate a 7-day matzah eating festival, because already then they can eat from the day after the Pesach. They eat matzot, bekaloi, be'etzem hayom hazeh. The same terminology that we find by leaving Mitzrayim is employed once again here. In the same time of the day even, they start to eat their matzot, vayishbot haman, and that's the time that the man is going to stop And once they're in the land of Israel, they don't need the man anymore. They go straight from man back to matzah. And sure enough, from man to matzah, they then go to eating after their 7 days of matzah. They're then going to be ready not only to fight their wars, but also to eat mitvu ha'aretz. Then they're going to be ready to eat from the chametz of Eretz Yisrael. So notice this beautiful transition that we have that's represented from our holiday. We went from chametz to matzah, from matzah to man, and not just from man to chametz of Eretz Yisrael, but from man to the matzah of Eretz Yisrael, and then to the chametz of Eretz Yisrael. In order to properly appreciate what it means to eat from the miraculous food of the land, we have to go back to the miraculous food of the matzah. We have to remember our redemption. We have to remember that we have our own culture, a culture that began with our birthday during these days, a culture that began with recognizing that our entire physical existence and survival is completely dependent on our religious one. And that's why we find that in the Parshiah of the Moadim, it's imperative that we remember the link then between the matzah and the chametz, that we start to count these days of Sfirat HaOmer from the time that you come into the land and you begin to harvest the first of your barleys, the wheats, bring that to God and count the 7 weeks that actually it takes to create chametz, to create sourdough bread. And then you're going to bring that as a mincha chadasha. You're going to recognize that even that comes from heaven. And once again, your leaven from the earth is really leaven from heaven. And that's the message of the matzah. The man is perhaps even a slightly more miraculous means of remembering the redemption that we had through matzah. As we eat matzah, this is what is supposed to be the message of Chag HaMatzot. Remember redemption, but don't just remember the narrative of how we left Mitzrayim and we didn't have enough time to bake our bread and to have it turn into chametz. Remind ourselves that all of our food is no less miraculous than matzah, and man is the same as matzah and has the same halachot. And through consuming our food, we actually edify ourselves even more, which is why upon the imminent entrance we started on the night of the Seder to talk about our historical past, to talk about how our father, either Yaakov or Leaven, was wandering Aramean, and God brought us down to Egypt. But then from Egypt, God brought us, and this is what we're going to continue to recount on the day of Shavuot. God brought us to this land of Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. What is Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash? He brought us to a different diet. He changed our diet from a vegetable diet to a diet of chalav. Chalav, says Rabbi Eliezer, is not just, as Rabbi Akiva says, the milk of the flock. It is the milk of the fruit. And dvash is not, as Rabbi Akiva says, just the honey of bees. No, it's the honey of the tamarim. Remember the tamarim and elim? In other words, your entire diet is going to change from a vegetable diet to a fruit diet. Our entire diet is going to be dependent on the rains from heaven, on the fruit trees that need the rains from heaven. And that explains the Midrash, Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. It's not just the physical milk and honey of the land, it's the words of the Torah that are sweet as milk and honey. And this is what we have to internalize. This is the transition that takes place over these days. And you may be wondering, as such a spiritual people, why is it that so many of our messages are going to be inherent in the food that we eat? Well, we know that psychologically, this certainly is a way of internalizing and literally infusing ourselves with a message. But I'd like to end with Proust's understanding of the significance of smells and taste in food. Because when it comes to food, we don't just remember the present. It's not just about filling our bellies. Rather, to remember our past. It is so difficult, he says, to remember our past. It's a labor in vain to attempt to recapture it. All the efforts of our intellect must prove futile. The past is hidden somewhere outside the realm, beyond the reach of intellect, in some material object, and the sensation which that material object will give us. And certainly on the night of the Seder, Rabban Gamliel says that's why you need the Pesach and the Matzah and the Maror. If you're really going to put yourself in a situation of B'chol Dor Vador, Chayav Adam L'rot, or as the Rambam says, Laharot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim, ki'ilu hu ata yatsa miMitzrayim, how are we going to somehow bring ourselves to a state of collective national memory when those memories are hidden in our subconsciousness? They've been so long abandoned and put out of mind, the shape of things, either obliterated or lying dormant. They lose their power of expansion, which do not allow them to resume their place in our conscious. But then what happens from a long distant path, after the people are dead, after the Dor Hamidbar is over, after the people who enter the land of Israel initially are over, taste and smell alone, more fragile but more enduring, more unsubstantial, more persistent, more faithful, remain poised a long time, like souls, remembering, waiting, hoping, amid the ruins of all the rest, and bear unflinchingly in the tiny and almost impalpable drop of their essence, the vast structure of recollection. The matzah holds within it almost the souls of the past. The matzah holds within it those memories, the memories of leaving the culture of Mitzrayim, the memories of redemption that Am Yisrael remembered 30 days later in the Midbar. We want that food again. The lechem lasova, the matzah, retains the memories of the miraculous manna, and also within it, the memories of first coming to the land of Israel, tasting the grains with which they prepare the first matzot of their first chag hamatzot in Eretz Yisrael, and retains within it even a vestige of the first of their means of finally living off the miraculous food of the land of Eretz Yisrael. I want to wish all of you then, not only let's say, a holiday of delicacies, but particularly the 7-day matzah eating festival. When you eat, when you consume the matzah, to allow these memories of our subconsciousness to come back so that we can once again remember how our physical sustenance is truly dependent on our spiritual one. And especially in these days where we feel our physical vulnerabilities all the more, to remember that we have the antidote within us. The matzah reminds us of our means of survival and helps come to qualify what is so unique about our culture. We can only eat the chametz of Mitzrayim. We can only bring the bikurim to God once we remember our past. That goes back to our birthday and the beginning of our own calendar way back in Egypt. We can only then truly live and survive and thrive as Jewish people in the land of Israel if we understand that even the lechem min haaretz is really leaven from heaven. Chag hamatzot sameach to all of you, and wishing you a very fruitful Yom Iyun and continued internalizing of the messages of Chag hamatzot.
Thank you. Thank you so much.